is Teresa from Teresa's Spot for Art, and welcome to Canvas and Crime. Everything She Ever Wanted is a true crime book written by Ann Rule, focusing on the case of Pat Taylor and Tom Allenson, and how Pat came to be charged with the murder of 3 people. Ann Rule was an amazing true crime writer and a former Seattle policewoman who deeply cared for the victims and the families she wrote about. Unfortunately, Ann Rule passed in July 2015, but her books carry on. Pat Taylor was born in the South in 1937. She was adored by her family and spoiled by her mom, Marguerite, and her stepdad, Colonel Clifford Radcliffe. Pat quickly learned how to charm and manipulate people into doing things her way. When she did not get her way, she threw quite the tantrum. Pat's first marriage was at 15 to Gil Taylor. Gil was an Army sergeant, and they soon had 3 children, Susan, Debbie, and Ronnie. The life of being an Army wife and mom to 3 soon became too difficult for Pat, so she convinced her parents to have her closer to them, and so her mom could help with the kids. Soon after moving closer to her mom, Pat and Gil's marriage fell apart, and they were divorced in 1971. By 1973, Pat met Tom Allenson, the son of a wealthy lawyer who shared Pat's love of horses. At the time, Pat was in the middle of a very ugly divorce. Tom's parents were old school and religious and were very upset over the impending divorce and sided with Tom's ex-wife. Tom's parents, Walter and Carolyn, did not approve of Pat either, and their relationships became very strained. By May of 1974, Pat and Tom purchased a 52-acre farm in Zebulon, Georgia, and got married in a Tara Gone with the Wind theme wedding based on the novel published in 1936 by the same name, Gone with the Wind. They even dressed as Rhett and Scarlett. The feud between Pat and Tom's parents, Walter and Carolyn, grew. Pat even accused Walter of sexual harassment. Fear, anger, and lies took on a life of their own between the foursome and the town, and Tom and Walter became convinced that one wanted to kill the other. In a very unusual situation on August 3rd, 1974, Tom supposedly went to talk to his mom when he knew his dad would be out. For some reason, his mom was not home, and he decided to wait in the basement. Coincidentally, Walter received a call and was told that someone saw Tom enter his home. Walter rushed home, and by the end of that afternoon, Carolyn would be found shot to death on the basement stairs, and Walter would be found shot to death on the ground. Tom was found and arrested. Between a series of lies told by Pat in an attempt to give Tom an alibi, and the lies told by Tom in his defense to get out of being charged with murder of his parents, Tom was eventually tried and found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. This was only after 2 months of marriage, leaving the entire 52-acre horse farm with Pat. Tom in jail in Kentwood Farms, the name given to the 52-acre farm, still heavily mortgaged, and the debt was owed mostly by Tom's paternal grandparents, who were lovingly referred to as Papa and Nona. Pat committed arson and burned down her farm for the insurance money. nowhere else to turn, Pat started to worm her way into Tom's grandparents' lives, became their sole caretaker, and eventually convinced them to leave all they had to her, completely cutting out Tom's Aunt Jean. With her financial future locked into place, she began to systematically poison the grandparents with arsenic. As angry as Jean was for being cut out of the will, she began to suspect that things with her parents were not right. She went to the police and accused Pat of harming them. Pat was eventually arrested, found guilty, and sent to jail for 8 years. She was paroled on November 1st, 1984. In search of a job, Pat convinced a prominent Atlanta, Georgia couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jimmy Christ, to hire her and her daughter Debbie as at-home caregivers. Oddly, Mr. Christ died a short time after Pat began working for them. The Christ family became convinced that Pat neglected Mr. Christ and was also trying to poison his wife, Betty Christ, but it could not be proven. They were also accused of stealing money and valuables from the couple, and it was learned that Pat had lied about being a licensed nurse. Taking full responsibility for the thefts so her daughter would not get in trouble, Pat pleaded guilty to multiple charges in June 1991 and was sentenced to serve another 8 years in prison. Pat was released from prison in 1999 and went to live with her stepfather and his new wife. He had gotten married after the death of Pat's mother. Pat opened a doll shop named Pat's Pretty Playthings with the help of her stepdad. During this time, Tom was released from prison after serving 15 years. He was approached by the police and interviewed about his manipulative wife and was very happy to help. He told them that when he was first sentenced to prison, Pat tried to convince him to agree to a suicide pact with her. After serving time, learning about his grandparents and the Chris, Tom was convinced that Pat was really trying to have him commit suicide and had no intention of keeping up her side of the pact. He told the police that Pat was a liar. Pat was a headstrong, manipulative type person that would do anything to get what she wanted, and you do not know what she was doing, Tom stated. He had given her everything, his money, his power of attorney, his home, and his heart, and she had taken full advantage. The tragedy of his life would never have happened, he believed, if he hadn't married Pat to begin with. It seems as though Pat was responsible for at least 3 deaths and 3 more attempted murders, but was never charged. In 2008, Pat was charged with doctor shopping and fraudulently obtaining more than 3,700 painkillers in less than a year. She was charged with 3 counts of unauthorized distribution, entered a plea agreement, and was sentenced to probation only. As of September 23rd, according to the serial killer database, Patricia Taylor Allenson was currently incarcerated at the Baldwin State Prison in Middleville, Georgia. But those were the only details. I could not find anything more. Thanks for joining me for Canvas and Crime, and I will see you next time.